On August 28, 1944, as German positions collapsed across Romania after the sudden shift of Romanian forces to the Soviet side, a scattered German patrol became cut off near the village of Moldava. It consisted of 12 men, infantry remnants, a machine gun loader without his gunner, a radio operator with a failing set, and one field cook who had been delivering supplies when the front disintegrated. They regrouped in an abandoned farmyard, broken fences, smashed barn, no cover beyond crumbling walls. South of the farmyard stretched a shallow valley. That valley was their only escape route. But a Romanian infantry platoon had already begun crossing it in a wide skirmish line. Moving cautiously but steadily, their advance would bring them directly to the farm in under 3 minutes. The Germans had almost no ammunition, a few rifle rounds, a half-belt for the MG loader, and a couple of smoke grenades. A firefight was unwinnable. Surrender meant probable execution. Reports of it had already spread through the retreating units. Retreat north was impossible. The barn roof had collapsed across the exit path, trapping wagons and debris. To survive, they needed to escape south into the tree line before the Romanian infantry realized the farmyard was occupied. While the patrol argued over whether to run or prepare a hopeless defense, the cook opened his supply bag. It held 24 potatoes, baked earlier, coated with soot, ash, and dry dirt. Their round, dark shapes matched the silhouette of German egg grenades at a distance. The cook had spent months watching soldiers clean, wrap, and mud coat their explosives, and he knew how easily frontline troops misidentified thrown objects when under stress. He proposed something absurd. Throw the potatoes like a grenade volley to trigger a panic reaction. The corporal in charge hesitated only seconds. With ammunition almost gone, any distraction was better than none. The cook dumped the potatoes onto the floor. Soldiers grabbed them by the handful, posted along the southern wall, and waited until the Romanians passed the valley's midpoint. The corporal gave the signal. The Germans hurled every potato in a single, wide arc. Dark shapes sailed through the air, bounced on rocks, tumbled through dry grass, and struck wooden posts with sharp cracks. From the Romanians' perspective, a full grenade barrage had just landed in front of their line. The reaction was immediate. Shouts, diving bodies, halted movement, scattered formations. And in that sudden confusion, the German patrol slipped from the farmyard into the tree line. The Romanian infantry did exactly what the cook predicted. The moment the dark objects hit the ground in front of them, bouncing, rolling, striking stones, they reacted as any frontline unit would when believing grenades had been thrown. Soldiers dropped flat, dove behind tufts of grass, and shouted warnings down the line. Officers tried to restore order, but the sudden halt shattered their forward momentum. A few Romanians fired instinctively toward the farmyard, but without knowing the source or scale of the supposed attack, they hesitated to push forward. Their doctrine relied on coordinated movement, not rushing blindly into what looked like a preset German defensive position. The potato volley had created the illusion that the farmyard was held by a prepared force, possibly machine guns, possibly grenadiers. No one wanted to be the first to step into blast range. Those seconds of paralysis were the opening the German patrol needed. The cook led them to the narrow gap behind the stable where the wall had partially collapsed outward. It wasn't a proper exit, just a broken corner of stone wide enough for a man to squeeze through, but the patrol had no alternative. The corporal went first, then the radio operator, then the MG loader. The cook moved in the middle, pushing the men to stay low and move quickly along the thicket. Behind them, the Romanians began shouting again. They had realized no explosions followed the grenades. Troops rose cautiously and advanced several steps before stopping a second time, unsure whether the lack of detonations meant a delayed fuse or a feint. Their officers scanned the farmyard, but saw only silence and dust. The uncertainty alone bought the Germans almost a full minute. As the patrol slipped into knee-high brush at the valley's edge, they heard the Romanians finally commit. Boots pounded the dirt. Orders were barked to tighten the line. Someone fired a burst from a submachine gun into the farmyard entrance. Another soldier threw an actual grenade through the broken wall, its blast echoing across the farm. Had the Germans been there, it would have torn through them. Instead, they were already moving along the tree line, ducking under branches, staying off the open slope. The cook guided them toward a narrow drainage ditch he remembered seeing while delivering rations 2 days earlier. It wasn't on any of their maps, but it cut across the valley floor and fed directly into the wooded gully to the west, their only real chance of escape. The ditch offered cover no higher than waist level, but it hid movement. The patrol dropped into it and began crawling, dragging rifles and gear through mud and dry grass. The cook's potatoes had bought them confusion. Now they needed distance. Behind them, the Romanians began sweeping the farmyard and shouting to regroup. They realized they had been deceived, but not how, and they had lost nearly 3 minutes to a trick no one could have anticipated. The gap was thin, fragile, and shrinking, but it existed. The drainage ditch was barely wide enough for 2 men side by side, but it provided something the Germans desperately needed: a covered line of movement running parallel to the Romanian advance. The cook dropped into it first, sliding on his elbows through the dry mud. The others followed without hesitation. Rifle stocks scraped the sides, boots kicked up dust, and every movement felt too loud, but it beat crossing the open valley under fire. Above them, the Romanians reached the farmyard ruins. They moved cautiously at first, rifles raised, expecting more false grenades or hidden defenders. Only after clearing the structures did they realize the Germans were gone. Shouts erupted immediately. Some soldiers pointed south, others west. Officers barked contradictory orders. The patrol's escape had fractured the Romanian momentum once again. But the danger was rising. By the second a Romanian NCO spotted faint movement in the grass near the ditch, just a flicker of mud and cloth. He fired a burst, bullets cracking overhead. The Germans froze. Dirt showered down. A second burst followed, closer this time, the rounds stitching the ground beside the ditch. They were discovered. The corporal ordered faster movement. The ditch curved gently westward, but the curve also meant the patrol was briefly exposed to anyone looking down from the slope. The MG loader rose to fire a few covering shots, but the cook grabbed his shoulder and pulled him down. A muzzle flash from the hillside confirmed it. Had the loader stood a second longer, he would have been hit. The Romanians began flanking. 2 squads moved along the slope, one on each side of the ditch, trying to angle their fire downward. If they reached the bend first, they could trap the Germans inside the ditch with no escape. The corporal ordered the patrol to increase pace, but crawling through uneven mud slowed everyone. The cook scanned the ditch ahead. He looked not at the ground but at the grass tops, how they leaned, where they bent, how the airflow shifted. He recognized a point where the ditch dipped lower, meaning visibility from the slopes above would be blocked for a few meters. He shouted to the corporal and pushed forward toward that depression. Romanian bullets struck the ditch walls as the patrol sprint crawled into the low point. A grenade thrown from the slope landed short, exploding harmlessly against the ditch's rim. The concussion sent dirt raining on their helmets, but the depression shielded them from shrapnel. The cook ducked instinctively and crawled even faster. Ahead, the ditch widened slightly and fed into the wooded gully the cook had remembered. Trees grew thick around its entrance, forming a natural gate of branches and shadow. If the patrol reached that gully, they could disappear into the undergrowth and break line of sight entirely. But the Romanians were closing in. Shouts grew louder, boots hammered the slope, and now rifle barrels were appearing over the ditch rim. The Germans needed seconds, just seconds. The cook, lying near the front, grabbed the last potato from his pocket, a leftover he hadn't thrown. Without hesitation, he tossed it at the nearest rifle barrel. From above, the Romanian soldier saw an object fly upward and panicked, throwing himself backward. His shout made the men around him dive too. A single potato bought another sliver of time. The patrol surged forward into the mouth of the gully. The trees swallowed them. The ditch ended, cover began. For the first time since the farmyard, the patrol was out of direct fire. The gully's entrance offered protection, but it came with its own trap. The ground rose sharply on both sides, funneling the patrol into a narrow corridor of roots, rocks, and dense undergrowth. It hid them from Romanian fire, but it also slowed them down. If the Romanians reached the ridge above the gully first, they could fire straight down into it, like shooting into a trench. The Germans pushed deeper, branches slapping against helmets, boots sinking into damp earth. The cook stayed near the front again, not by rank, but because he was the only one who knew the gully's layout from earlier supply runs. He recognized a fallen tree ahead and that marked a small split in the ravine. One branch continued straight but opened into a shallow depression. Two visible from above, the other curled sharply right behind a cluster of thick pines. That bend offered the best concealment. He pointed right. The corporal trusted his instincts and redirected the patrol behind them. Romanians reached the ditch's end. The moment they found it empty, they spread out along the slope, scanning the gully for movement. One soldier spotted broken branches in the ravine below and signaled the rest. Rifle fire cracked immediately. Random probing shots meant to flush out the Germans. Bullets tore through branches overhead, but the gully's rightward bend shielded the patrol from direct hits. The cook kept moving, guiding the men through a tangle of roots and thick moss-covered stones. The forest muffled their steps, but did nothing to hide noise if they slipped. Every misstep risked exposing them. Romanian voices drew closer. The patrol could hear them splitting into two groups, one pushing directly into the gully mouth, the other climbing the ridge to fire downward. Their coordination was improving. Panic wouldn't fool them twice. The corporal gestured for silence. Men pressed themselves against the gully wall, breathing carefully, ears straining. The Romanians had reached the ravine's entrance. Their boots slid on loose soil. They descended cautiously, scanning the undergrowth. One soldier fired again into the depression where the left branch of the gully stretched. His rounds hit only dirt and dead leaves. The Germans remained unnoticed, but only temporarily. The cook looked ahead and saw the terrain shift. The gully widened slightly and the forest thickened, creating a patch of tangled brush. It was the only place broad enough for the patrol to leave the ravine and climb toward the deeper woods, but reaching it required crossing a short exposed slope. They had to move now. Before the Romanians realized the gully had two branches, the corporal signaled. The patrol began climbing, using roots and saplings for grip. Dirt crumbled under boots. A few stones rolled and dropped into the gully behind them. Romanians heard it instantly. Shouts erupted. A burst of fire ripped through the brush below. Another soldier fired toward the sound of movement, bullets slicing through ferns. The patrol scrambled faster. The cook grabbed the radio operator's jacket and pulled him upward when he slipped. Two riflemen hauled the MG loader over a fallen trunk. Branches broke under their weight, snapping loudly. Too loud. A Romanian soldier reached the gully split and spotted the broken brush. He fired 3 rounds, forcing the Germans to flatten against the slope. Dirt sprayed their faces. Another Romanian shouted that he could see movement. No more tricks, no more delays. They needed the next tree line, 30 meters ahead. The cook pointed toward a cluster of pines forming a natural shadowed pocket. If the patrol could reach that, they would vanish into the forest's deeper darkness. The corporal gave the order. Run. The patrol broke into a crouched dash, stumbling over roots, half sliding up the last meters of the slope. Bullets struck tree trunks around them, showering bark splinters. A Romanian grenade landed short, bouncing off a root before exploding harmlessly downslope. Then as suddenly as it began, the ground leveled. The patrol reached the pines. The forest swallowed them again. Behind them, the Romanians poured fire into empty brush. The German patrol had survived the gully, but the chase was far from over. The Germans pushed deeper into the pine cluster, where the terrain shifted again. Needles muffled footsteps, but the forest floor sloped downward in unpredictable drops. Fallen branches hid holes, roots formed natural trip lines, and the density of trunks cut visibility to mere meters. It was cover, but it was also a maze. Moving fast risked injury. Moving slow risked being caught. The Romanians reached the gully ridge seconds later. Their fire shifted upward, then spread across the tree line in an attempt to locate the patrol bullets cracked through branches. But the forest density prevented effective aim. Romanian officers called for a forward sweep, splitting their platoon into 3 groups, one staying along the ridge, one pushing through the gully, and one advancing parallel to the Germans' escape direction. Their coordination was tightening. Panic from the potato trick was fading. Experience was taking over. The corporal knew the patrol had only minutes before the Romanians triangulated their position. Their only advantage now was distance, and even that was shrinking with every cautious step. The cook scanned the terrain again. looking not for enemies but for patterns. Wind direction through the branches, breaks in undergrowth, the smallest shifts in ground density. That was when he spotted something the soldiers had overlooked. A narrow animal trail cutting diagonally across the slope. It was barely visible, packed with needles and leaves, but it led into thicker forest where movement would be quieter. He pointed it out. The corporal accepted the suggestion without hesitation. The patrol diverted into the trail. For several meters, the forest insulated them from pursuit. Sounds softened, rifle reports grew distant, and even the shouts from the Romanians muffled into scattered echoes. But the path narrowed dangerously, forcing the patrol into single file. One man slipping could block the entire line, and with the Romanians advancing in three groups, a delay here could be fatal. Then came another threat, a clearing. It wasn't large, just a gap where a lightning strike had felled several trees earlier in the year. But the open patch meant exposure. Crossing it would take seconds, yet seconds were enough for the Romanians on the ridge to spot silhouettes through the trees. The patrol gathered at the clearing's edge. The corporal scanned the opposite side but saw no movement, only a wall of ferns and low brush. He prepared to send the first rifleman across when the cook shifted his gaze to the ground. He didn't look at the clearing. He looked at dust fine. Dust swirled in a faint pattern, drifting sideways, evidence of a crosswind moving low along the forest floor. That airflow meant one thing. Smoke from the earlier gully fighting was settling into the clearing, creating a thin haze barely visible from the ground, but visible enough from above to obscure outlines. The cook said one word, "Now." The corporal nodded. The patrol sprinted across the clearing in staggered bursts. 2 men, then 3, then the next pair. Dust puffed under their boots but blended with the haze. From the ridge, the Romanians would see movement, but distorted, blurred, impossible to confirm as German soldiers rather than shifting smoke. Halfway across, a Romanian on the ridge fired a probing burst. Bullets sliced through the haze but missed. The Germans didn't stop. They reached the far side and dove into the ferns. The Romanians shouted again. They were adjusting. The corporal urged speed, but the cook pointed left instead of forward. Tracks on the ground, fresh, heavy, parallel, cut through the brush wagon tracks. A German logistics trail used earlier that week. It led downhill toward a ravine that curved around the Romanian advance. If they followed that trail, they could bypass the Romanian pincer entirely. The corporal accepted the cook's instinctive read of terrain once more. The patrol shifted left. Behind them, the Romanians entered the clearing. Their visibility collapsed in the haze. They fired again, wide, uncertain shots at shadows. The Germans were already gone. The gap, narrow, fragile, constantly threatened, had survived another terrain shift. But the forest was tightening again, and the patrol was moving toward the most dangerous part, the ravine descent. The wagon trail the cook spotted led them downhill, but it quickly became clear why it had been abandoned. The path narrowed into an eroded slope where roots protruded like hooks, and loose soil slid beneath every step. One fall could send a man tumbling into the ravine below. The Germans slowed instinctively, but slowing meant danger. The Romanians had reached the clearing behind them, reorganizing for a more deliberate sweep. The corporal looked at the descent, then at the cook. The cook nodded. It was risky, but survivable if they moved with purpose. The patrol began their descent in a staggered line, each man gripping roots, trunks, or branches to keep balance. Dirt crumbled under their boots. Pebbles skittered downslope, clinking against rocks. Every sound felt amplified. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Above them, Romanian voices reappeared. Closer, more controlled. No more panic or confusion, just methodical hunting. A rifle shot cracked. Bark exploded from a tree trunk near the MG loader. The Romanians had spotted movement, though not clearly enough to aim. More shots followed, each probing, testing, pressing the Germans to move faster than the terrain allowed. The corporal hissed for silence. Noise now would betray direction. The cook moved near the front again. He placed his feet with almost unnatural precision, reading soil density the way others read footprints. When he stepped on loose patches, he shifted weight instantly. When he found firmer ground, he tapped it for the men behind. He guided them around a dead log that would have collapsed underfoot, and avoided a hidden drop that could snap an ankle. A single shout from above confirmed the Romanians had reached the trailhead. They could not see the Germans yet, but they knew the descent existed, and they knew the patrol had gone that way. The slope forced the Romanians into single file, slowing their pursuit but tightening it at the same time. The chase was becoming close range again. Then it happened. The radio operator slipped. His boots skidded on loose soil, sending him sliding. He grabbed a root, but the root tore out of the ground. Dirt poured downhill like a miniature landslide. The noise echoed through the ravine. The cook reacted instantly. He lunged, grabbed the operator by the collar, and anchored his other hand around a tree root. The sudden weight nearly pulled him off balance too. Dirt continued sliding around their legs. A Romanian rifleman fired. The bullet struck the slope inches above the operator's hand. The cook pulled harder. The corporal and two riflemen reached them, forming a chain. Together they dragged the operator back to footing. No one spoke. They kept moving. As they neared the bottom of the slope, the forest changed again. Less steep, more stable, with thicker undergrowth. A faint depression in the ground hinted at an old foot trail, snaking westward along the ravine bottom. It would hide them completely from above. But they had seconds before the Romanians reached the midpoint of the descent. The corporal gave a sharp hand signal. The Germans broke into a crouch run, following the depression deeper into the ravine. Branches whipped at their sleeves. Mud soaked their boots, but they were no longer exposed. No rifle from above could see them now. Behind them, Romanian boots reached the steep part of the trail. Men slipped, cursed, grabbed branches for balance. Their progress slowed exactly as the Germans' speed increased. For the first time since the farmyard, pursuit and escape were fully decoupled. The Romanians could not fire effectively. They could not run. They could not close the gap. And the gap, fragile for 5 relentless minutes, began widening again. The patrol continued down the hidden footpath, gaining precious distance with every careful step. But the ravine's twists weren't finished, and the forest ahead held one more narrow funnel, a place where the chase could collapse again if they misjudged it. The hidden footpath at the bottom of the ravine gave the patrol their first real breathing room. The thick canopy blocked overhead sightlines, and the curved walls absorbed echoes. For nearly a full minute, the Germans moved without hearing a single pursuing step. But the cook knew better than to assume safety. Ravines on this terrain often constricted into natural choke points where movement slowed and sound amplified, and that was exactly what awaited them. Ahead, the ravine walls rose sharply, squeezing the footpath into a narrow slot barely wide enough for one man. Fallen branches choked the gap, and water erosion had carved an uneven trench through the center. Pushing wagons through here would have been impossible. Even on foot, it was a complication at the worst possible moment. The corporal halted the patrol. The men listened. Faint Romanian voices drifted down from somewhere behind, no longer scattered, no longer chaotic. The pursuers had reorganized at the slope. They were descending more carefully now, checking every branch, every track, every slid patch of dirt. If they reached the ravine's bend, they would discover the Germans had vanished into the bottom, and they would follow. Time was running out again. The corporal gestured toward the narrow slot. They would have to pass through it, slowly, silently, and once inside, they would be exposed if the Romanians reached the open section behind them. The cook inspected the choke point. He pressed his hand against the ravine wall, feeling for moisture. He tested a root to see if it would hold weight. He checked how soil clung to his boots. Then he identified the only viable approach, a zigzag through the debris, stepping on firm stones rather than soft ground to avoid leaving deep tracks. He signaled the corporal. The patrol entered the slot. Movement was painfully slow. Soldiers squeezed sideways between the walls, rifles held vertically. The MG loader nearly got stuck on a protruding root. The radio operator had to be guided around a hidden puddle that would have splashed loudly. Every step had to be placed deliberately. Halfway through the slot, a sound froze them. Footsteps, multiple, reaching the ravine floor behind them. The Romanians had found the entry point. Shadows appeared on the wall. Voices echoed. Someone shouted, "Down here!" The Germans couldn't speed up. The choke point was too tight. If they rushed, someone would slip or jam the passage and doom everyone behind him. The corporal looked at the cook. The cook looked at the terrain. He pointed at a cluster of loose stones to the left. With a sharp gesture, he urged the last two riflemen to kick them deliberately, downward, not sideways. The stones tumbled into the trench, creating a sharp clatter that echoed away from their actual direction. The plan worked instantly. The Romanians heard the noise deeper in the ravine and assumed the Germans had already passed farther south. Several soldiers sprinted forward toward the echo, leaving only a small group following the real tracks. That small group, however, was still close enough to be dangerous. The patrol cleared the narrow slot just as the first Romanian rifles appeared at its entrance. The Germans ducked behind a thick cluster of brush on the other side of the choke point, using the bend in dense vegetation as cover. If they ran now, they would be spotted. If they stayed too long, the Romanians would find them. The corporal held up a hand, ordering complete silence. One Romanian soldier entered the slot, inch by inch. The Germans could hear his breathing. Another followed behind him. The choke point slowed them exactly as it had slowed the Germans. That delay, those few seconds, gave the patrol their chance. When the second Romanian stepped inside, the corporal signaled. The Germans slipped silently around the bend, using the vegetation and terrain as a shield. Once they were out of sight, they began moving again. Faster now, following the ravine as it widened and curved westward. Behind them, the Romanians emerged from the slot and immediately realized they'd been misled by the falling stones. Shouts erupted again, angry, frustrated, urgent. But the Germans were gone from immediate view. Another gap had opened, short, fragile, but real. And ahead, the ravine began rising toward higher ground, the final ascent before reaching German pickets. The ravine widened gradually, then began to rise in a long, uneven slope. At the top of that rise lay a narrow ridgeline. If the patrol reached it first, they could descend into a dense stretch of forest known to be screened earlier by German recon elements. If the Romanians reached it first, they could fire straight down the slope and trap the Germans in the open. Everything came down to which side gained that high ground. The patrol climbed fast but carefully. The slope was steeper than it appeared from below, covered with loose needles and hidden stones. Each step had to be deliberate. A slip here would slide a man several meters backward. The cook led them around a patch of soft soil that would have collapsed under weight, guiding the patrol toward firmer ground near the left edge of the slope. Behind them, Romanian voices grew louder again. The group that had chased the false noise was returning, and the men who had come through the choke point were closing the distance with determination. The chase had merged again. Romanian rifle fire cracked through the trees. Not accurate, just pressure, meant to break rhythm. Bullets struck trunks, ricocheted off rocks, and sliced through needle clusters. The Germans kept climbing. Halfway up the slope, the MG loader stumbled. His boot snagged on a buried root, and he fell forward, sliding several feet before catching himself. Soil avalanched downward around him. The noise was loud, too loud. Romanian voices immediately shifted direction toward the sound. The cook didn't hesitate. He grabbed the loader by the arm, hauled him upright, and shoved him toward a firmer patch of ground. Then he pointed farther left, where an outcropping of rock formed a natural step. The corporal understood instantly. They could use the rock shelf to climb faster and gain elevation in fewer strides. The patrol shifted left. Romanian fire intensified. They had seen shapes, dark, quick, moving through needles. A burst from a submachine gun tore through branches overhead. Another burst struck the slope where the loader had fallen moments earlier. The Germans climbed harder. Breathing turned ragged. Hands scraped on bark and stone boots slipped, but regained footing. Then came another complication. The slope narrowed near the top. A thick fallen tree created a blockage, forcing the patrol into a tighter column. One by one, they crawled under the trunk, scraping elbows and gear. The cook pushed through and immediately pointed toward the right, where a cluster of young pines leaned outward, creating a screen thick enough to break line of sight from the ridge behind them. The corporal again followed the cook's instinct. The patrol moved into the pines and continued climbing. At the bottom of the slope, Romanian soldiers finally emerged from the ravine and saw the Germans clearly for the first time since the farmyard. They raised rifles and fired upward. The angle protected the Germans, the bullets embedded in the slope rather than hitting bodies. But it also told them something critical. The Romanians were very close now. One more slowdown, one wrong turn, and they would be overtaken. The patrol reached the last stretch, a steep final incline no more than 20 meters long. Beyond it lay the ridge crest. The trees thinned here, leaving patches of exposed ground. If they crossed one of those at the wrong moment, the Romanians could hit them from below. The cook paused, scanning the ground. Then he pointed to a crooked birch with roots jutting above the soil. He recognized the pattern of erosion around it. The soil there was compacted, meaning steady footing. The patrol moved along that line, stepping directly on the compacted patches rather than the loose areas around them. It made the final climb faster. The corporal reached the crest first. He dropped to a crouch, scanned the far side, and waved urgently. The forest on the other side was denser, darker, and safer. It sloped downward toward a shallow basin. Terrain German recon units had passed through earlier. The patrol surged upward. One by one, they crested the ridge and disappeared into the deeper trees beyond. Seconds later, the first Romanian helmets appeared below the crest. Too late to stop the crossing. The Germans were still not free, but for the first time, the ridgeline gave them tactical advantage. They had reached higher ground before the pursuers. Crossing the ridge did not end the danger. It only shifted it. The forest on the western side dropped sharply into a basin filled with dense brush, fallen trunks, and thick ferns. It was perfect concealment from movement, but also difficult terrain. If the Germans slowed too much, the Romanians cresting the ridge behind them could still catch up, firing downward into a funnel with no easy cover. The corporal signaled a rapid descent. No formation, just speed and silence. The men half ran, half slid down the slope. Needles and loose soil carried them several meters at a time, mud smeared across uniforms. Branches snapped under boots. But snapping branches in a downhill rush blended with natural forest noise far better than snapping branches during a quiet retreat. The cook stayed near the front again, scanning for hazards. Loose stones, sudden drops, animal burrows. More than once he raised a hand just in time to stop someone from stepping into a hidden dip. His instinct for terrain, honed from months hauling supplies across these woods, kept the patrol upright and moving. Behind them, Romanian voices echoed from the ridge, closer than before. Angrier, determined. A burst of fire cracked from the crest. Bullets cut through treetops but lost velocity quickly. The Germans pushed deeper into the basin, lowering their silhouettes and letting the forest swallow them. The Romanians fired again, probing down the slope, but the angle was wrong. The dense brush deflected shots, and the changing terrain hid movement. Reaching the basin floor, the patrol faced another challenge. The ground leveled out into a wide, marshy strip. On maps, it was marked as a seasonal swamp. In late summer, it was a patch of soft earth, high reeds, and shallow puddles. Crossing it quickly would be difficult. Crossing it slowly would be fatal. The corporal hesitated, but the cook didn't. He pointed to patches of darker soil among the reeds. To most soldiers, they looked identical to the surrounding mud, but to someone who carried water, firewood, and potatoes through varied terrain daily, the difference was clear. Darker soil meant firmer ground, compacted by years of water flow. The cook mapped a route with his finger, drawing a path through the marsh that zigzagged along the most stable footing. The patrol followed. Every step mattered. A misstep meant sinking to the ankle, then the shin, then being stuck. Several times a man nearly lost balance. Once the radio operator stepped too wide and sank to his knee. The cook grabbed his arm, hauled him free, and pushed him forward. No one spoke. Speed meant survival. Halfway across the marsh, rifle fire flared again from the ridge. But now the shots were wild. The Romanians had reached the crest, but could no longer see clearly into the basin. The Germans were ghosts in tall reeds. Still, the Romanians descended. Their boots reached the slope. Their voices got sharper. They were spreading out, trying to find tracks. One soldier fired a signal flare that arced overhead, bathing the forest in pale red light. The marsh reflected a faint glow. but the reeds hid silhouettes. The patrol pushed on. At the far end of the marsh, the ground rose into another tree line. And at the top of that rise, just barely visible through the leaves, the cook spotted something that made his pulse jump. German wire marking a listening post perimeter. Not a full defensive line, not a fortified position, but soldiers. Rifle pits. Friendly ears. The corporal saw it too. He signaled the patrol to climb the rise at full speed. The Germans made the final ascent just as the Romanians reached the marsh edge. A burst of Romanian fire chased them, rounds snapping into tree trunks behind their legs, but the distance and terrain stopped precise aim. Then the miracle the patrol needed finally happened. A German sentry saw movement and challenged. The corporal answered with the correct password. Shouts followed. Rifles lowered. Hands reached out to pull exhausted men over the wire. The patrol crossed into friendly ground, breathless, scraped, mud-covered, shaking. But alive behind them, the Romanians halted at the marsh, unwilling to cross into a zone potentially covered by German guns. For the first time, the pursuit ended. The cook's insane potato trick, terrain instincts, and constant split-second decisions had carried them to safety. The patrol collapsed behind the German picket line, breathing in ragged bursts, uniforms torn and caked with dirt. Not one man had escaped without cuts or bruises. The corporal leaned against a tree, gripping his knees, sweat dripping from his helmet rim. The radio operator slumped beside a foxhole, still shaking from the near fall on the ravine slope. The MG loader dropped to the ground and let out a long, disbelieving exhale. But all eyes eventually turned to the cook. He stood there, chest heaving, hands muddy, face streaked with sweat and dust. In the chaos of flight, he had looked like a man possessed, throwing potatoes like grenades, reading terrain like a map he'd drawn himself, sensing danger seconds before anyone else. Now in the relative quiet, he looked almost embarrassed by the attention. German infantry from the listening post emerged cautiously, expecting the patrol to be wounded, maybe carrying casualties. Instead, they found an intact squad, exhausted but alive, who spoke of a Romanian force nearly triple their number, of a chase lasting nearly 30 minutes, and of a cook whose split-second decisions had saved them, again and again. Word spread quickly down the line. One soldier asked how the escape had started. The corporal answered truthfully. It started with potatoes. There was a moment of disbelief, then a ripple of laughter. Short, tired, almost unreal. But the corporal wasn't joking. He told the story plainly. How the cook had grabbed a sack meant for dinner, hurled potatoes at advancing Romanian infantry, and bought precious seconds of confusion that allowed the patrol to escape the farmyard encirclement. What followed was even more remarkable. The cook didn't brag, he didn't dramatize, he simply said he did what made sense. It was the others who explained how he had recognized firmer soil, read airflow through the clearing, spotted the safer route along the ravine, and chosen the line of descent where roots gave better grip. These weren't battlefield instincts. They were the instincts of someone who had spent months carrying kettles, hauling sacks, gathering firewood, and navigating the terrain every single day. While riflemen memorized firing angles and MG crews drilled loading belts under pressure, the cook learned the forest. And on that day, 28th August 1944, that knowledge had saved them. The Romanian force eventually withdrew from the marsh edge, unwilling to charge blindly into what they assumed was a prepared German position. The chase died quietly, replaced by distant orders and fading voices. The patrol knew the Romanians would try again tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that. But at least for now, they had survived. When the patrol finally reported to Battalion HQ, the officers listened with raised eyebrows. The story sounded absurd. Potatoes thrown like grenades, terrain read by eye in seconds, a cook guiding a patrol through a ravine under fire? Absurd, but true. By evening, it became part of the battalion's unofficial lore, not written in any report, not recorded in formal documents, but passed from soldier to soldier as an example of how survival in 1944 often depended on elements no manual could teach. Improvisation, instinct, and the willingness of ordinary men to do extraordinary things under pressure. As the cook cleaned the dirt from his hands and returned to his field kitchen, the corporal approached him. He didn't offer a speech or praise, just a simple acknowledgement. "You saved us," he said quietly. The cook shrugged. It was only potatoes. But everyone who had been there knew the truth. It hadn't been only potatoes. It had been timing, instinct, terrain reading, and courage compressed into 90 seconds that changed the fate of an entire patrol. 3 minutes earlier, they had been hunted men. Now they were alive because of one cook's ridiculous, brilliant, crazy idea. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more WW2 stories.